Welcome, everyone. My name is Britt Hoover. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Assistant Dean for Student Support at Reed. It is so nice to see you, your names, your camera, your face right now on this screen. I miss you all on campus. We know that you have a lot of questions on your mind as you look ahead to fall 2020. And I want you to know that in addition to this session on-campus housing, Reed is organizing a few other virtual info sessions for students on the topics of health and well-being, financial aid, and academics. And the Reed community will receive information soon about those virtual information sessions, so please stay tuned. Some of the questions we collected from you all in advance on the RSVP form definitely are more relevant to those panels, so we won't be asking those today in the on-campus housing session, but we will make sure those other panelists see those questions so they can address it in those sessions. I'm going to be facilitating today's panel on the topic of on-campus housing. I'm joined today by colleagues from Residence Life and Student Life, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves now. Amy, can you start?
Sure. Hi, I'm Amy Schuckman. I use she and her pronouns. I'm the Associate Dean of Student Campus Life, so that means I oversee residence life, student engagement, and orientation.
Hi there, I'm Clia Taylor. I am the Director of Residence Life for Housing Operations. I use she, her pronouns, and my role is focused a lot more on the housing assignments process. So I'm guessing a lot of these questions are going to be for me.
Everyone, my name is Julia Nicholson. I use she, her, hers pronoun. I am the Director of Residence Life for Residential Education, so my role is oversight of the House Advisor Program and other educational and community opportunities within on-campus housing.
Hi, I'm Julie Maxfield. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Associate Dean of Students for Academic Life, and my role here is related to my connection to disability and accessibility resources, and also my chairship of the Priority Housing Committee. So we'll have a chance to talk about those things later.
Hello, my name is Janice Yang. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Student Engagement, and so I work very closely with our orientation team and oversee campus engagement opportunities and partner with our student organizations and clubs.
Hi, I'm Cindy Anderson, Interim Dean of Students, and it's my pleasure to serve Reed as the supervisor to the Associate Deans in the Division of Student Life and standing in for our incoming Vice President who will be joining us at the end of this month.
Thank you, everyone. So before we dive into the questions, I just want to give you a brief overview of the format for today. We're going to start by doing a brief overview of the on-campus plan for fall 2020. Some of that information might answer some of the questions that you all sent in before this session. After that overview, I'm going to ask the pre-submitted questions to the panel on your behalf. And if you have additional questions while we're talking, you can privately chat me those questions. And if we have time at the end, I'll pull questions from the private chat. So if you can find Britt Q. Hoover on your chat function, send me those questions. And as we have time, I'll introduce new questions to the panel. If it's okay with you all, we'd like you to keep your mics off just for sound purposes. And we'd like to keep to like this moderated format of questions so we can get through things efficiently. If we are unable to answer some of your questions, please email Residence Life about any on-campus housing questions you have, or Student Life about any other questions that you have. We will be sure to get back to you as soon as possible. Again, we know there's a lot of information you need to move forward for fall 2020, and we definitely want to help. We're going to aim to wrap this up by 12:50 p.m. And again, please reach out to us if we were unable to address some essential questions for you. Okay, Cindy, can you start by providing an overview of what on-campus housing will look like this fall 2020?
Sure, I'm glad to do so. And I'm glad to see that Anna is joining us today. She was one of 3 student members that were our participants in our Student Life Working Group. And we were asked to consider what would it take, what would it look like for us to be nearly as in-person as possible come this fall. And our working group understood that to mean nearly as possible, nearly as many people as possible to return to being and living on campus. We used primarily some guidance documents, including from the CDC and from the Oregon Health Authority's Higher Education Coordinating Council, to inform our considerations about how to best and most safely re-inhabit the campus. These considered looking at guidelines for how many students should be placed in each room and other considerations when returning the students to campus. And so we made some decisions that were, I think, on the conservative side of things when you compare us to our Northwest independent college peers. And I'm going to pivot now to Amy to talk a little bit about what that means for our occupancy and our abilities to accommodate students who are requesting on-campus housing.
Sure. So I think a lot of the materials that we're going to cover today really focus more on kind of the implementation of a lot of the decisions that the working group made, as well as a lot of the communication that came out last week. And one of those things that we highlighted in the communication last week is that we were reducing occupancy on campus. We had about 1,130 beds before after the opening of our new residence hall Trillium, and we are going to be reducing occupancy to about 820 beds. So what that means is that we're going to be treating our rooms as single rooms, single private bedrooms. So we've gotten some follow-up questions about apartments. If double apartments are going to be treated as doubles, but as many of you know, the bedrooms are private in those spaces, so they will still be private bedrooms, even though we call it a double apartment. Additionally, one of the things that the Student Life Working Group focused on and was pods for first year students. We did get a couple questions about pods, so I just want to provide a very brief overview and then really shift away focus, because we do not expect any returning students to necessarily be part of those pods unless perhaps you are a very late addition to housing much later in the summer. These first year pods and will also include some transfer students, and they're really a collaboration with the academic program. The pods are going to be formed based upon some shared courses, which will allow some opportunities for students to perhaps really kind of focus on the course material together, or perhaps be experiencing the kind of same academic deadlines and lectures and things like that. We felt that it was a really important element to include for our first year students as another means of building kind of community as well, since they're going to be entering READ at such an unusual time. And I'm going to turn it over now to Clia to kind of further talk about the housing processes for returning students.
Great, thank you, Amy. Yeah, so the first thing I wanted to discuss is sort of how we prioritized who gets those 820 beds on campus. Again, the fact that this happened right after we had Trillium on campus and thought that this meant that our housing shortage problems were over was really unfortunate timing. But I am pleased to say that so far numbers are looking actually really positive for being able to offer quite a few returning students housing. So you all have probably gotten this information already in a variety of ways, but the students that we ended up prioritizing was done after a lot of discussion with working groups. And the main groups that we are prioritizing for housing first are incoming students, which is not a change from anything in the past. First year students have always had guaranteed housing on campus as long as they've completed housing forms by the June 15th deadline. So we are sticking to that. In addition, we recently did approve sophomores to be prioritized for housing and get guaranteed on-campus housing as well, and felt that it was really important to do that for sophomores this year too, especially because a lot of our sophomores were on campus for their first year and had to leave suddenly and were really disrupted, and we want them to get sort of a second chance at being able to be on campus and build that community. So they are still going to be offered priority housing as well. The next group that is getting priority are returning international students. We all know that it's a lot more complicated for international students right now to figure out how to get flights home or how to leave the country or re-enter the country, and they also have a much more challenging time securing housing off campus. So that's another group that we are prioritizing. After that, students that have worked with disability and accessibility resources and have an approved accommodation for guaranteed on-campus housing will definitely receive housing. So I know that some students are still working with DAR on that right now. I know they're trying to get through requests as quickly as possible. So connecting with their office if you have questions about your accommodation is a really good idea. And then beyond that, in the past, we've had a priority housing process. We were hopeful that we would not need that again after Trillium was built, but right now we are accepting priority applications again. Those are part of the housing portal pages that returning students were all emailed about. So it's just a really short question in the portal for students who believe they need priority housing. But one thing we also did is for students who had applied and were approved for priority housing in the past, we just had a checkbox to let us know that you applied and were approved before, so you don't have to do a full application again. We can just check our records and confirm that you were approved for that before. So that's kind of the breakdown of who gets priority. After that, any juniors and seniors who don't fall into any of those categories of being an international student or having an accommodation, that group of students will kind of get grouped together just as sort of the last pool of students to get offered housing to, and they will get random time slots that they normally would have gotten to see if they can secure housing. So one difference there is this year, Residence Life is going to be assigning rooms to students instead of students being able to select their own rooms. This is not our preference. We really prefer to let students be able to select their own rooms, but this year we felt it was really important to be able to do things quickly so students know whether or not they can secure a room on campus and be able to plan accordingly. And it is far faster for our department to be able to do batch assignments than it is to do a 2-week-long room selection process for students. So we really wanted to get students answers as soon as we could. So what that means is we are holding a number of rooms for incoming students. That number is fluctuating a bit as incoming students are making decisions about whether or not they actually come to campus, but we are holding a group of rooms for them right now. The rooms that we have set aside for returning students, as soon as everybody completes their new portal pages, which the deadline for that is 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, we're going to start looking at who has said that they are still interested in living on campus, what categories they fall into. So how many sophomores we have, how many accommodation students we have. I'm assuming there's going to be quite a bit of overlap in a lot of these categories. So we're just going to be working through those assignments as soon as we can. And the deadline for us to email students and get them either their room assignment or let them know they haven't received housing yet is July 20th. So we're working to get it out even faster than that, if at all possible, because we really do want students to have information as soon as they can to be able to make informed decisions. But the 20th is the latest date that students would find out about whether or not they get housing. I'll also say that if students don't get housing the first time that we sort of release rooms and inform people of assignments, that doesn't mean that they for sure won't get housing. It might just mean that they wait a little bit longer. So for students who feel like they can't wait and they just really want a set decision after the 20th, if they don't receive housing, we would certainly understand if students want to look for off-campus housing. However, if you want to be in touch directly with Residence Life to talk about what the wait list looks like or what your chances might be of securing housing, you should certainly do that, because especially as our incoming numbers shift, we may end up being able to open up some more beds. So we're hopeful that we are able to accommodate most people who need housing. I'll say that so far, the numbers of people who have confirmed their interest in living on campus this coming year are actually feeling really manageable. So we had 800 people initially sign up for room registration way back in February, and we could certainly not accommodate 800 returning students right now. But based on the numbers that we're seeing, it looks very likely we'll be able to accommodate most, if not all, returning students who have indicated interest on campus. So that's a big relief for me. Hopefully it's a relief for you all to hear that too. So it's still a little early to make any guarantees, but numbers are looking really, really good. So I think I covered most of the stuff in my section. I'm sure we'll come back around to some of it. But I'm going to pass things along to Janice and Julia to talk a little bit more about what move-in looks like once you get your assignment and then figure out when it is that you can actually show up on campus.
Great. So you will be receiving, if you haven't already received, an email with instructions on how you can sign up for a move-in date and arrival time slot. So on the actual move-in date, when you arrive on campus, you will first complete a COVID-19 self-test under the observation of a medical professional. From there, you will pick up your Read Student ID, if you're a new student, your room key, and other welcome materials that we may have on hand for you. And from there, you can proceed to move in to your assigned residence hall. Students are the only ones permitted inside the residence halls, but parents and families can drive the car to campus and help the students unload the car of the belongings. Once students are fully kind of moved in with all the stuff in the rooms, the self-quarantine period begins, where students will have to stay in the room and wait until the test results are in, which can take up to about 72 hours.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add is that Residence Life staff will be available in some way, shape, or form if students have questions or need help troubleshooting any sort of issues they might have upon move-in.
Great, thank you all for that overview. I'm going to now start asking some of the questions that were submitted in advance of this session. So the first question that was asked is, what does community building or socializing look like in the residence halls this fall?
Yeah, so I will take that one. So the house advisors in returning student communities have traditionally focused on bi-weekly, so every other week programming. Last year was our first year of having upper division communities, and what we found is that most of the successful programming efforts were actually what we call self-guided or passive programs, so information or options for students to engage with each other or with informational materials on their own time. So it is our plan currently that all programming done by house advisors will be managed through a self-guided or passive program approach. In addition to that, every HA will be creating some sort of communication platform for their communities, whether that's something like Discord, WhatsApp, Facebook groups, whatever makes most sense for the community itself. And that will be a space for community members to communicate with each other, ask questions, reach out to their house advisor for individualized support. And then in addition to that, Residence Life more generally will be providing community building opportunities, virtual or digital events that all students on campus are welcome to attend.
And I'll just quickly add from the broader campus perspective, we will be having fall programming, working with our Student Senate, with all the various clubs and organizations to ensure that students continue to have those points of connection and community building and have the opportunity to delve into various interest areas. And so be assured that we'll be partnering together with the housing advisors to be able to provide that comprehensive programming across the campus.
Thank you, Janice and Julia. Clia, will room changes be allowed before or during the semester?
Sure. So when students receive their room assignment in July, we don't imagine that we're going to have a lot of bandwidth to be able to change those assignments unless there are some pretty extreme circumstances. So if someone were to receive an assignment, for example, that didn't meet accommodations that they had on file, which hopefully would never happen, but just in case it did, students could certainly reach out to us and we could work with them to adjust their assignment. Otherwise, because of the number of people who need housing and the fact that we anticipate having a wait list, and all the other logistics that are necessary to get people onto campus, it will be very rare that we would change someone's assignment after they get sent out in July. Once students are on campus, I think we have typically always had a pretty high threshold for room changes, and I expect that to continue. I don't think that we will be making many room changes during the year. Frequently, room changes happen because of roommate conflicts, and since everyone will be in a single this year, I anticipate the requests for room changes actually will not be that high, which is good. However, if there was an extreme circumstance such as a no contact order in place or something like that, where two students just really could not continue to be in the same community, our department would definitely work with them to see if we could figure something out. And that will all depend on what our available inventory is. It will really depend on how many beds we have available. Again, since everything is single occupancy, it will really just depend on whether or not we have space, but I expect that room changes will be rare.
Thank you. Someone asked, I am not in one of the priority groups for housing, but I provided information in my application saying why I need housing for fall. Will this be, or how will this be evaluated?
Yeah, I can take that. So Reed has always acknowledged that there are some students for whom on-campus housing is really essential in a way that it is maybe more convenient or desired than it is for other students. And so there's a committee. That committee is chaired by me. We review requests from students to live on campus during times where housing is scarce. So over breaks, in situations like this. We also reviewed requests from students who needed to stay on campus longer than the college was open for everybody else, right? So when we sent folks home, some people got to stay. So this committee looks at every single bit of information individually. So we like to really get to know what's going on and figure out how we can support folks. As Clia mentioned, students that have shared their challenges and hardships with off-campus housing with us in the past and have been approved will not need to retell that story. We'll be able to know that they're a student who might not have the support it takes to be able to find off-campus housing. We use information from financial aid. We use information provided by the student in order to figure out for whom living off campus is more than just an inconvenience, but would be a serious impediment to their ability to continue. So those are the kinds of challenges and hardships we're looking for. Every story is different, but it really needs to meet a threshold beyond it'll be hard to find off-campus housing and more like without on-campus housing, I'm not sure I can be a student kind of thing. So,
thank you. This question is a popular one. I'm getting a lot of people privately messaging me this question. So just so you all know, I think hopefully Amy will be able to answer this question for you. What if I change my mind about wanting to live on campus?
Yes, hopefully I can answer it. Well, there's lots of different kind of pathways for this. So as Clia mentioned earlier, Residence Life sent out an email to all 800 returning students that had previously indicated that they wanted to housing on campus and asked people to kind of re-up their interests. And she asked that they fill out the form and put some additional information and preferences on there. If you receive that email and you do not want on-campus housing, you don't need to do anything. Just don't fill anything out and we will assume that you don't have an interest in housing. If you filled out that form already and maybe you learned something in this call or things continue to evolve and you decide on Friday or anytime before housing assignments come out that you're not interested in housing, we would like you to email Residence Life to let them know so we can make sure that we are not assigning you a bed kind of in our first pass through housing. If you get a housing assignment by July 20th, and again, something has changed, or maybe you have found out that all your courses are going to be online and you want to stay home or someplace else, we ask that you do not sign the contract and then just email Residence Life and say, no, thank you. I do not need this. Please give this bed to someone else. Say you get a housing assignment, you sign a contract and then something happens. You have up until August 1st to cancel your housing contract with kind of no questions asked. After that, your housing contract, you would need to petition to get out of your housing contract, and petitions are kind of reviewed on a case-by-case basis. The exception and not needing to petition to get out of your housing contract is if you decide to take a leave of absence or otherwise are not enrolled at the college, then your housing contract would also be broken for you.
Thank you. Another question we received, what steps will be taken to make sure that these living arrangements do not negatively impact Reedy's mental health?
Sorry, had to mute. You know, this is such a thoughtful question, actually. And my first thing I want to say is remember that at the introduction of this, Britt shared that there would be upcoming virtual interest sessions. And one of them we're featuring is on health and well-being. And I don't want to go into any of their specifics now, but I can tell you that the folks at the HCC have been paying careful attention about particular health needs that are being prompted by our current COVID realities. And so they will cover that. One of the things that strikes me when I think about living on campus is there are a number of benefits. One of them is that I think actually the on-campus resident has the most proximate access to mental health resources, has the greatest ability to let their staff know of the emergent needs, will be the target of this passive programming that Julia has talked about in terms of regular updates of available resources. And we'll have the ability to see people's faces day to day, which is always a source of social encouragement. I think that having single rooms too is going to be a place that gives rest and respite to most of our students who are concerned about the ability to control their spaces, because they'll be the only one inhabiting that space. And so that provides for a little bit more of the physical space to support the headspace. No matter what, we're going to be leaning into this together. And we hope that our students lean into it with each other, becoming good sources of peer-to-peer support in productive ways that where they socially engage with each other through appropriate social distancing. But that doesn't mean that means physical distancing, but not social distancing.
Thank you. So yes, more information to come. And again, there will be more virtual info sessions that address that topic directly. Another question we got, there were lots of questions about housing addendum and enforcement. How are you going to enforce parts of the housing addendum, like making sure that students are only leaving campus for essential reasons?
So I will take this question, and I want to acknowledge that this is super complicated and we're still working on a lot of the details of how this will be implemented on campus. So I think the first piece that I want to talk about is, like many things at Reed, our focus initially is around education. We want the whole community to be educated both about COVID and risks and impacts of not following guidelines that Reed has set for students living on campus. Additionally, we want to provide education on how to have conversations with community members who aren't following these guidelines, because one of the things that a group of us who are working on public health behaviors and how to monitor and enforce, in some cases, housing guidelines and more generally Reed's guidelines for being on campus, is talking about a community accountability and utilizing and really leaning into the honor principle, that this is not residents' life's responsibility to enforce. This is a thing that our entire community needs to be responsible for in order to keep our community safe. So I think it's going to really take a broad campus commitment to both following these guidelines and addressing other folks who may not be following these guidelines. The public health behavior group includes students, it includes staff across all divisions, it is done in consultation with faculty, and a lot of the pieces that we've been discussing regarding monitoring and enforcement really focuses on harm reduction. So if students are engaging in behavior that puts other students at risk because they are not following guidelines, they might meet with a staff member who might talk with them about the situation, maybe addressing any barriers they have to following those guidelines. Maybe the student doesn't have access to enough cloth face coverings, for example, and really talking about the potential impacts and safety risks for community members that may be impacted by their behavior. And really, I think we are talking about enforcement for more egregious behavior, such as learning that a student hosted a party in their room and had 50, 20 other students from across campus coming into a single residence hall and being within close proximity to each other. There was one more thing that I wanted to say, and it so part of this education piece is providing resources and skills to all community members for doing that sort of bystander intervention work. So when you see someone without a mask in your common room, what are the skills that you need to talk to that person and talk to them while keeping yourself safe? So a lot of the recommendations of this group are still being formulated, and we expect that we'll have more details about how that process will work towards the end of July. And then the final thing I wanted to talk about, because we've gotten a lot of questions about this particular point of the addendum, is leaving campus for non-essential reasons. There's been a ton of questions about that, and I know there's some folks working on elaborative language, and I think one thing that I want to say is that no staff that I'm aware of will be monitoring or keeping track of when students leave campus. This is not something that we're trying to be that micromanagey about. And the way that I like to think about it is, at Reed, we ask community members to consider the impact of their decisions in all things. And I think this is another case where that may apply. Thinking about the decisions of that you're making to leave campus and the amount of risk that you personally may be taking to do those things, and the amount of risk that you may be exposing others to. So if you are comfortable with a certain amount of risk, that doesn't mean that your community members who are living on the same floor are comfortable with that same amount of risk. And so really, keeping those things in mind as you make decisions to leave campus.
Thank you, Julia. Another question we received: how does monitoring, testing, and isolation vary for on-campus students versus off-campus students?
I will take that one, and I've added a resource to the chat box too, just to talk about working off-campus and on-campus students pre-COVID preparations of what they should do if they become ill. So Janice mentioned before that for on-campus students, they're going to be assigned their move-in date, and on their move-in date, they will be tested as they move into the residence halls. These tests, by the way, are paid for by the college and are going to be done with all faculty and staff and students returning to the campus. Off-campus students will receive a date that they will be able to come and also be tested. Of course, they will then go back to their off-campus residence for their quarantine period prior to the start of classes. So that is likely going to be the Tuesday and Wednesday prior to the start of classes. Then what about ongoing monitoring and testing? Well, we have, the college has purchased enough tests that we can do what we call surveillance testing. So they're using a purposeful statistical sampling for the on-campus environment, where they're going to move from group to group of students on, and I don't know about faculty and staff, but for sure students, on a week-by-week basis, just to get a pulse on what's going on with the health level. Certainly any place where we might have an individual with COVID-like symptoms, or where they have been known to have been exposed to somebody with COVID-like symptoms, we're going to be doing a purposeful testing of that person and all of their close contacts. That's going to be true for on-campus residents. Off-campus residents will be having the same thing available to them through Campus Health, and we are recommending that all students, irrespective of their place of residence, would come to the HCC for their testing. Um, the isolation and quarantine do vary for on versus off-campus students. Quarantine means staying in your assigned space. And by the way, students who are on campus who are quarantining or isolating have the advantage of being able to request wellness meals from the Commons. So quarantine is staying in your room. Isolation means you've come back with a positive test or you have symptoms, and we need to move you out of the general population into a residence hall that we have reserved for isolation. You will be required to stay there. Classes will be then moved online if you have in-person classes, and you will remain in isolation until you're medically released to be able to return to general population. Students who live off campus will have to isolate and their off-campus residents. And the information I put into the chat box also recommends that they should be prepared for that because they should be staying home then. That's going to be in their best interest relative to a full recovery. And then we would ask that they not return to the campus until they are medically cleared. There's an app that is being created for the entire campus where everyone will be asked to do daily surveillance checks of their own health. And then the app while the health information remains private, so that does not get consumed by anybody, but it gives then students the ability to show a green or a red light that they will then likely present when accessing their classes. So they'll show it as a means of coming into a class. And as they come into a class, they'll be wearing their mask. They'll show their app that they're well that day, either on their phone or on their computer. And that's how we'll be doing daily monitoring of the student body.
Thank you, Cindy. I want to make mention again that you can expect in the health and well-being session that we will talk in more detail about isolation and quarantine expectations. And I also want to say we are quickly also working on plans for how to support students who are being asked to quarantine and isolate both on and off campus. We don't have those details right now available to talk about, but very, very soon we will. And that's very high on our to-do list and priority list to work out. So please know that as alarming as that might sound, there's lots of support that's going to go with those measures. Okay. A next question we have is, quote, I didn't request a disability housing related accommodation because I assumed there would be enough room for everyone on campus. What do I do?
Yeah, I can take that. So there are two different kinds of disability-related housing accommodations. One is for the type of room you need, so first floor room or something along those lines, right? And then one is for the ability to live on campus itself. That in and of itself is the accommodation. So if you had that accommodation before, the ability to live on campus, and you didn't think you needed to request it this year, please request it now. DAR, Disability and Accessibility Resources, will have that on file, and they'll be able to very quickly tell Res Life you're re-upping that accommodation that you've had in the past. So please reach out. If you have a different kind of a disability-related housing accommodation and you just want to make sure that Res Life is aware of that so that when you hopefully get a room, it will be a first floor room, you can also reach out to make sure that DAR and Res Life have connected and they know, yep, when you get a room, it's going to be a first floor room kind of thing. If your situation is not yet known to Disability and Accessibility Resources, if this is the first time you're interested in a housing related accommodation, or if it's the first time you're interested in that accommodation that gets you on campus housing, the process is going to take a little bit longer to determine your eligibility. I still encourage you to reach out right away, but it may be the case that you're sort of a little bit behind in the process because you didn't jump in earlier, and then at some point we're only able to grant accommodations based on available housing that's left. So still totally worth it to jump in right away, even if you've never gotten started with them, but it is a little bit of a process, and you need to be in touch with them by tomorrow, ideally, in order to get this going. So yeah, that seems like enough. I know that we're running out of time, so I'll end there.
Thank you. Another question, how will apartments work this fall?
That's a really good and tough question. So apartments are obviously a little tricky because that's the only area on campus now where we are saying that people can still be in doubles. And we're doing that on a really short timeline when we're not using our normal processes for having students be able to select roommates. So the first thing I'll say about apartments, they are still only open to juniors and seniors. Sophomores are not eligible to live in apartments unless they have an accommodation through disability and accessibility resources. So that already kind of limits the number of students who are eligible to live there. In past years, the RCAs, the Reed College apartments, have been only available to seniors. This year, we are making the RCAs and the Birchwoods open to both juniors and seniors, just to kind of level the playing field for juniors a bit. So I think what is tricky right now is until we know the numbers of students who are both interested in coming back to campus and our juniors and seniors and are interested in living in apartments, it's going to be really hard to say how we prioritize people for those spaces. There are a good number of students who already have disability related accommodations for apartments. So those students will get prioritized to go into apartments first. That means we're working with a pretty small pool of apartments, and we are going to need to see how many students preference that in their housing portal application that is due tomorrow morning. So what I will say is we always prefer to put students together who want to live together. So I am hopeful that with the double spaces we have available and students who have preference double apartments, that they already signed up with a roommate back in the spring, and that we are able to, and that roommate now has also still expressed interest in on-campus housing, and that we are able to place those people together. We can't guarantee it. A lot of students' plans have changed. We don't know what the numbers will look like, or there, as Julie said, there are still people who are getting accommodations, which may change our numbers a bit. So I think, unfortunately, a lot of the answer to this question is still a little bit to be determined. I think what we will do is, if for any reason there is a student who is assigned to a double apartment who is assigned a roommate that they did not initially select, we will certainly be reaching out to those students and connecting them together so they can start having some discussions before they get to campus, and are also really happy to do some back and forth and one-on-one conversations with folks if they have concerns about an apartment assignment. But it will be students with accommodations and then juniors and seniors who preferenced apartments who are getting priority for apartment spaces.
Great. Thank you. A question that's come up from multiple students in the private chat is about spring housing. So if they don't get housing for fall, would they be able to live on campus for spring semester?
I can take that one. Spring is really far away. It always feels far away at this time of year anyway, but I think right now it feels exceptionally far away considering the number of things that could change before then. I will say in past years, we have been able to accommodate everyone on campus in the spring who wants to live on campus. I don't know if that will continue to be true with reduced occupancy, but we do have a spring housing form on our website. It should be updated next week. So for students who either don't get housing or make the choice to not live on campus for fall semester, they're welcome to fill out a spring housing interest form. We aren't able to guarantee housing for folks who do that, but a lot of students do end up going on leave or deciding that they don't want to live on campus second semester. We may end up with unexpected vacancies. So any vacancies that we do have available for spring, we will certainly offer to people who have already filled out that spring interest form. And I would imagine that that Residence Life will be able to give people a much more clear idea of what this looks like once fall semester has actually started and once we see how things are going. But yes, by next week, there will be an updated form on our website that students can definitely fill out, and they're welcome to do that and just stay in touch with our department about whether or not that's looking likely the closer we get to spring semester.
Thank you, Clia. The last question I think we have time for today, I've received multiple questions about students wondering how to get their belongings that they left behind in spring. So either stuff that's in storage when they return to campus. How do you anticipate them getting their belongings from storage?
I see Samara on this call. Samara, would you like to introduce yourself and answer this question?
Yes. Hi, my name's Samara. I'm the operations coordinator for Res Life. So I am the person who oversees storage. So students should have received an email last week, Monday, in regards to storage and the different options that they have in regards to their items left on campus. So depending on what items you left on campus, whether or not you were a walk away, all of those details, you can find those details on our website. It is updated. Students will need to fill a form out if they want to come to campus and retrieve their items. This needs to be done a minimum 1 week before they want to come on campus. So let's say I would like to come to campus next week. I make an appointment for today's Wednesday and onward. You'll receive a confirmation email of whether or not your storage appointment has been accepted, and then all the information about guidelines, social distancing, things like that, making sure students are staying safe will all be included in the email that goes out to you. If you do need to cancel any appointments or need to make any changes, just email Residence Life. I will say that depending on when you do cancel your appointment and the next time that you want to come on campus, it may conflict with other students. So just be mindful of that, because we are trying to limit the amount of students that are on campus at one time.
Thank you, Samara. There was a quick chat about bikes left in indoor storage. Is there information online about how to retrieve bikes from indoor storage as well?
So bikes are actually under community safety. The communication that we've got from them is that, and I can be corrected if I'm wrong, that students just need to contact community safety, and then they can set up an appointment time for them to be able to access their bike.
Thank you. So with our last minute left, again, I want to repeat that I know there are some questions we weren't able to address today in this time, but please email Residence Life about housing related questions or Student Life about non-housing related questions. I want you to know that if you are considering living off campus, or it's your preference, or you do not receive on-campus housing, we do have designated support for you in finding off-campus housing. So we have an off-campus housing guide. We're going to have a virtual info session on how to find off-campus housing. We're going to have drop-in advising sessions for students who have questions about how to find and manage living off campus. And we're going to have some designated staff to answer those questions. So if that's something that you need assistance with, please email studentlife@reed.edu, and I can give you some more information, but we will be emailing the Reed community soon about all those virtual info sessions to come. I just want to say on behalf of my colleagues, thank you so much for tuning in. Please do communicate your questions to us. We want to help. We know a lot is on your mind. And so please reach out. It was good to see everyone, or at least see your names on the screen. And I hope you are well, and we'll see you soon.